Hey guys, it's Rachel from the Little Green Lamb, and today I have my August wrap up. You know, we have our Dino, Baby Yoda, all the books, all the craziness going on at this desk. I managed to read 11 books this month, and we're going to jump right into it. Okay, so in the month of August, I read 11 books. 10 books and a short story, but I'm still really happy with my reading progress. It's definitely going to slow down from here on out because I start school next month, and I could be working and, it's going to be a lot. But I'm going to get into the books I read. Also, sorry if my voice sounds a little bit weird. I just woke up a little while ago and I'm just trying to get on filming today before it gets louder in the house. Okay, so the first book I read was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. And this book I liked, I didn't love. I thought it was very hard for me to get into. Like, I don't regret reading it because it was definitely a good read. And I really liked this thriller because on the back it says an exclusive wedding on a remote Irish island. The bride, the plus one, the best man, the wedding planner, the bridesmaid. All have a secret, all have a motive, but only one is a murderer. So it basically tells you from the perspectives that you're reading, one of these people has committed the crime, which was a really interesting way to go about it. It did kind of remind me of Agatha Christie's And Then There Was None. I haven't read the original text, but I've read other adaptations of it, and it kind of had those vibes. I just didn't feel like the characters really stuck out too much for me, but I did like the setup that the author did put. It just took me a while to get in the book, and I didn't mesh with all the characters. I'd say the perspectives that I enjoyed reading the most were almost everybody but the best man. I just couldn't really get into his perspective as much until later in the book. Then we have Verity by Colleen Hoover, which I really, really enjoyed. I actually want Colleen Hoover to write more thrillers. This book is basically about a woman who steps in as a ghostwriter for a famous author who's not able to write her books. And she moves into her house, and it's about all the creepiness and stuff that she finds while she is being a ghostwriter for this famous, prolific author. And yeah, Colleen Hoover needs to write more thrillers. This came out as an independent release, and I didn't get to it at the time. I believe it came out when I was in school or right before I was about to move back to school. So it kind of, not was off my radar necessarily, but it kind of just got missed because of all that hubbub. But I'm really excited that I read this. I finished this in 2 days, really fast. Normally it'd be like 3 or 4 days per book, but I just devoured this book. It was amazing, and I loved it so much. I think if you've read Colleen Hoover's other books and weren't a big fan, you might like this thriller side of her writing a bit better, so I definitely give that a try. The next book I read was Regretting You by Colleen Hoover, and this was her release, I believe, from last summer. Another kind of example of, going back to school. It came out potentially in August, if I'm not mistaken, and kind of got overlooked by me. Not that I didn't remember it, but like with all the hubbub, like I just explained before. So after I read Verity, I wanted to catch up and read this latest release by Colleen. And this book is basically, I don't know why I turned over to the back. It's basically about a mother named Morgan, and she's a young mother, and her daughter's 16 now, and she had her daughter at 16 or 17. And it's about how they work together and how they mesh together. And then they have obviously some drama thrown into their lives, and they have to learn to deal with that. And it's about their relationship primarily and all the other things that kind of orbit their relationship. And I really enjoyed this book. It's definitely not one of my favorite Colleen Hoovers, but I thought it was a really good one, and I really liked the dual perspectives. Then the next book I read was The Ice Princess by Camilla Lackberg, and I really enjoyed this book. I read her debut from, it was released this year, but I believe it was released this year in English, but I believe it was released last year in Swedish and probably other languages. But I really enjoyed The Gilded Cage, which I read earlier this year, so I want to read her other books, which are part of a series. And I enjoyed this one. It did take me a little while to get through because I did go away while I was reading this for the weekend, and that's why it took me a little bit longer. But I would say The Gilded Cage for me is definitely better. But I'm currently reading the sequel of this book. It's obviously going to be a September read, but I'm really enjoying that. So I think it's just the first book getting into and getting used to the characters, because then by the time I got to the second book, I'm already used to the characters. It wasn't the most thrilling thriller in the sense where it wasn't like really suspenseful. It was more like following a detective in a mystery novel than a thriller, I would say. But it definitely had some like heart-stopping elements, which it does say on the front, and it definitely was suspenseful and twisted in ways I did not expect it to. So I really enjoyed this so far, and I'm going to continue reading the series. Obviously, I'm on the second book, so I've already continued. But if you read The Gilded Cage, I'd definitely still read this series if you really like her writing, because it's very similar, and she's very good at twists and turns. Then the next book I read was The Wife Who Knew Too Much by Michelle Campbell, which is my second Michelle Campbell book. I actually read her other book. Oh my gosh, why am I forgetting the title now? She Was the Quiet One, I believe it's called. I cannot see it even on my shelf right now because I forget where I put everything because everything is all mixed up right now because I organized it a few weeks ago. But basically this book is about, you have two Mrs. Fords. One of them is an older one, the first wife, and she's really fabulous, but she ends up dead. And the second is the new wife, so the second Mrs. Ford, and she was a small town waitress who was in love with Connor since she was a teenager. And then we learn about Connor Ford, who was a husband to both these women, and kind of all the mystery, intrigue, what happened to the first Mrs. Ford, and everything like that. This thriller, I actually really enjoyed this. I read it actually in 2 days as well. It just went by really quick, and like the writing's pretty like nice sized. I literally flew through it. I really like Michelle Campbell's books. Like, this wasn't the best thriller I've read in my life, but it was like one of those really entertaining ones I'm going to remember really loving and really enjoying. But I'm really bad at guessing, so I'm really bad sometimes at explaining thrillers, but I'm really bad at guessing who did what, who done it. But I really loved this one. I really definitely recommend this one. Okay, so it's a little bit later in the day. My camera died when I was filming that earlier. But anyway, the next book I read was Shut Up, You're Pretty by Tea Matonji. And this is a book of short stories. I don't know how far I got into my explanation. This is before my camera died. But I definitely read more by this author. I really like that the short stories followed one person because I've been trying to read more short story collections and read shorter things just to work on my comprehension. But I found it very easy to get into the stories because it was the same person. It was interesting following her from the time she moved to Canada, and she's in the Scarborough, Toronto region, and seeing her grow up. There was some darkness to it, but that's what comes with life, and there was very interesting thoughts that she had, and I just really enjoyed the short story collection. I definitely read more by this author. Then the next book I read was The Girl from Widow Hills by Megan Miranda. And this book I wasn't too keen on. It was okay. I've never read a Megan Miranda book. I know she has other books. I don't know how this book fares compared to the other books. But this book was basically about a girl, and she had a tragedy happen. She was rescued, and there's a whole rescue operation that was conducted when she was a little girl, and she became famous from this tragedy. And she moves away. She's trying to start her new life, and then somebody from her past shows up unexpectedly, and that kind of starts this whole saga. And The Girl from Widow Hills refers to her hometown of Widow Hills, and it was okay. I would definitely give this author another chance and read another one of her books. That's definitely not the question, but I didn't really like this thriller that much. It definitely had a really good payoff, but I just felt like it was very slow. It took me almost like 150 pages to get into it. But I definitely wouldn't I feel like if you haven't read one of her books yet, this might not be the best one to start with, just because I started this one and I feel like maybe I might have liked an earlier book from hers. If you've read her books before and you maybe read this one and weren't too keen on it, could you let me know a book of hers that you really enjoyed? The next book I read was Exciting Times, and this book was another one that was very interesting to me. I feel like it took me a while to get into it, but I did enjoy and would read another book by this author. I thought I was going to like this book a bit more than I did end up liking it, but it was still good. This author's writing style just took me a while to get into, which is, my own comprehension problems, nothing on the author. But this book is basically about a girl named Ava, and she's come from Ireland to, is she in Japan or China? I cannot even quite remember. She's in Hong Kong. Yeah. Okay, now I know. Sorry. I was getting so confused. I was like, where is she? I was like, she's somewhere in Asia. I couldn't quite remember where. But anyway, she moves to Hong Kong to teach English, and she meets a banker named Julian, who she gets entangled with. And then a little later on, she meets another girl named Eleanor, I believe. I'm forgetting. Edith. That's her name. I knew it was E, and it was like an older name. But then she meets Edith, and her life, like, it kind of becomes entangled. So she has like time with the one, time with the other, and time with both of them. And it's kind of about her exploring life and kind of how she deals with stuff, how she views herself, and these two people that come into her life and kind of teach her different things without her really knowing. And it's very much a contemporary novel about self-exploration, and the main character has a very interesting grasp on how she views herself, which was interesting to read from that perspective. I don't really want to give too much away, but this is a debut author, and I really want to see what's going to come more from her. What more is going to come from her. Sorry, that was really phrased badly. Then after that, I read a short story by Sally Rooney. The short story, let me just look up the name of it, but I'm just going to describe it before I tell you the name. So the short story is pretty much coming from this man's perspective, and it's about a girl his brother introduced him to, and he has some limited interactions with her, and that's kind of the gist of the story. The story is called Color and Light, and it's by Sally Rooney, and I have it up on my phone, so I'm just going to show you. I found it online. The New Yorker posted the story, so if you want to read it for free, I don't think it's published anywhere. I tried to find it, but yeah, I would definitely check that out if you're interested. And yeah, we'll move on to the next book. The next book is A Separation by Katie Kitamura. And this book I absolutely detested. I'm real sorry. This is such a beautiful, striking cover. I actually got this book as a bargain book, so I don't feel as bad about not liking it. I thought it was a thriller. It was not a thriller. So if you think this book is a thriller, it's not. Like, I did like the author's writing. Like, I found that very easy to read, and it was interesting, but I just didn't like any of the characters. They fell flat. The plot was kind of almost encased of her trying to find her ex-husband, who people think she's still with, but they're technically separated, not divorced. And she goes to Greece to find him, and it's all about that. But I just felt there was going to be a mystery element. It was more so like a character study, but I didn't find any of the characters very compelling. And I wasn't very pleased with this book. And it's so pretty, it's going to be a shame because I'm going to have to donate it because I don't want to keep a book on my shelf that I really don't think I'm ever going to reread. But yeah, it was really sad because I had high hopes for this one. I really just felt like reading something that had been on my shelf for a while. It's only been on my shelf for a year, so I guess it's not too bad, but just couldn't. And the last book I read, which I actually finished on the last day of August, was The Love Season by Ellen Hildebrand. Or did I finish? No, I finished on the 30th. On Goodreads, it says the 31st. But it's The Love Season by Ellen Hildebrand, which is one of her older publications. It's actually like a new cover that they came out with. But this book, it's not one of my favorite Ellen Hildebrands, but I really did enjoy it. I didn't really see where it was going, and I just thought it was very interesting. It wasn't as twisty as most of her books are, but it was interesting because you were slowly unraveling what had happened in the adult's life. So it kind of was going on with the main character, Marguerite, who's called Daisy, and it kind of centered on what had happened in her life and how she got to the place she's at, because we see her at the beginning of the novel at a very different place than we would expect based on the little inklings we get of her life. Don't know why I said life so weirdly there. And then we have Renata, who is her goddaughter, who's come to Nantucket with her fiance, and it's her exploring kind of her life. She's 19 years old and engaged, and like kind of grappling with that fact and the fact that she still wants to live her life and be independent. And Renata one day contacts Marguerite and asks to sit down because she wants to learn more about her mother, who was passed on when she was 5 years old. And it kind of goes back in time with Marguerite and her mother, and you see Renata's perspective of how she's getting about Nantucket. So you kind of have elements where it's in the present with both main characters, Marguerite and Renata, and then it goes back into the past and you see some of the establishing players that come into play. It was a good, like, I really liked it. I don't think it's my favorite Ellen Hildebrand, but that's really hard because there's so many now that I've read. But if you haven't read this one, I'd definitely pick it up. And yeah, so August overall for reading was like a so-so month. I read some really, really good books, and I read some books I wasn't too fussy over. Then I read some that fell in between, but you know what? I feel really good about this. I read a lot of books I just recently purchased or received, and I managed to pick up a few books that were kind of on my backlist, like reading those Colleen Hoovers, reading that other book, A Separation, that had been on my shelf for a while. So I feel pretty good about my reading month. In August, I read 11 things. I'm currently reading my 65th book of the year. My goal was 30 for the whole year, so I've doubled my goal, which is amazing. I don't think I'm going to get too far ahead, like the school's coming up, but my new goal is to get to 75 books, so that's 10 more books this year, which I think is totally achievable considering I'm doing schooling from home. That was already pre-COVID. I was already doing schooling from home just because my program is online. And yeah, that's basically it, but I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Definitely let me know what you're reading. Let me know what you're doing with your reading goals because I'm really interested in that. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.